Welcome. Welcome prior viewers and welcome new viewers. Welcome to Authentic Motorworks. My name is Ed Jacob. In this video, we're going to go over two very unique cars that my father put together. A 1970 Chevelle SSS and 1935 Packard 120 Club Sedan with an overhead cam 356 Packard engine. For those of you who know my father, you're very well aware of his abilities. Unfortunately, at this stage in life, my father is stricken with dementia. And so with that, unfortunately, these vehicles are not going to proceed any farther under his stewardship. Before they get sold off, I really wanted to take a moment to walk through both of these. This video will be pretty extensive. So if you're somebody who's really into deep, I'll say mechanical engineering, you're probably really going to like this. So let's just get into it. So what's so unique about this Packard 356? Well, you can see right off the bat, the engine doesn't look much like a traditional Packard 356 engine because it's not. This is an overhead cam conversion performed on one of those flathead motors. It utilizes a pair of, I don't know if it's left hand or right hand, doesn't matter. Utilizes a pair of Dodge 4.7 liter single overhead cam cylinder heads. Those vehicles were available in Durangos and Jeeps in the mid-90s, and this project was something that my father was mowing around in his head from the late 90s. The big concern on trying to find a cylinder head that would work with this project was the bore spacing. And these cylinder heads provided the greatest match between the cylinder head chamber and the bore spacing on the 356 motor. He tried a lot of different, or bought a lot of different heads just to get an idea, but ultimately these worked out well. Probably, maybe a little bit in hindsight, because of seeing some people who have converted Ford 300 to an overhead cam, or I should say an overhead valve arrangement, using LS series cylinder heads and cutting them in sections and positioning them directly over the bores. When this all started off, I guess my father wasn't looking in that direction, but anyway, this is what he crafted. So where to start? Yeesh, I'm already at a loss for words. So the two cylinder heads are welded together. They were machined and welded together, of course, naturally, to ensure not only coolant flow, but also oil drain back. That was another critical component. Thinking again, the cylinder heads were originally on a V8 engine, and now you're mounting it in a horizontal means. There had to be a lot of internal modifications to make that work, on top of just the inherent aspect of keeping them aligned. How was that achieved? Pretty basically. What was utilized was the overhead cam journals. So removing the camshafts and then getting a piece of bar stock that exactly fit the journals machined on the cylinder, matching the journals of the original camshaft, he was able to align both cylinder heads uniformly in order to do all the machining and ultimately the resulting welding. Additionally, what had to be fabricated was the overhead cam drive. And with that, of course, came all sorts of other things like the water pump and accessory mountings and so on and so forth. One other unique aspect, or another challenge among many, was the aspect of engineering this so that from a bore and stroke standpoint, didn't end up with too much compression and stuff. Essentially what I'm getting at is in between the cylinder head block and the engine block and the cylinder heads is what we call a deck plate. This was precision made by a company my father dealt with in the paper manufacturing days, Breading Engineering in Wisconsin. Big thanks to them, because out of courtesy, not only they took on the job, but they did it free of charge, which was a very nice gesture of them. Details on the motor, and again, it's so extreme. One thing that also was done is that ultimately the block was sleeved. So all the bores were machined out, deck plate was mounted, and then sleeves were inserted and then all machined appropriately. Additionally, as part of all that exercise, the original cylinder bolt holes in the engine block were plugged and everything had to be re-drilled so that it matched the bolt holes that were in the Jeep cylinder head. Intake manifold is all naturally custom made. It's a tubular arrangement. His original concept was to do this as fuel injection, but as years went on, he decided to keep it a little simpler. Not that any of this is really simple, but he decided to simplify things. Same goes from the ignition side. It's using a conventional Packard distributor to run off of everything. So ultimately, still in the engine is the whole cam drive and everything else. It's just not actuating anything. There was a packaging problem naturally because we have additional components. Everything that's hung off the front of the motor necessitated that the frame from the firewall forward was actually lengthened 15 inches, and this is carried into the fenders, the hood sides, which are not shown in the video, and then of course the hood, and the seam can be seen here. It was very tricky to mate all of that, keeping the proper contours, so on and so forth. For the exhaust side, what was utilized, maybe this would be a better angle, is these are a pair of LS stainless headers, and they were then mated to the cylinder head via an adapter all the way down. Valve cover was paired together with two overhead cam valve covers joined together, and he engineered some script to go with it as well. Also, he did engineer some script for the hood sides, and that enabled the ability to cover, I'll say, the seam on the hood sides where everything's put together. So you still have the series of factory vents, but there's a machined aluminum piece with a Packard insignia that helps sort of blend everything together. Another thing that this has is a Tremec 5-speed, a TKO 600 5-speed, which is mated to the engine via a Pontiac scatter shield. Just looking at the bolt holes and stuff, that ended up being the best course of action. And here we can also see the adapter plate that has been done there in order to mate everything up. This engine has about, I'll say, an hour's worth of run time. That was on an engine stand when it was put together. It has never been run in the chassis. The rear axle is a 1956 Packard Caribbean axle, which was modified. Packard Caribbeans utilized a torsion bar rear suspension, so I'm told, but this was modified because it still retains the leaf spring mounting. The interior, not finished at all, but it was going to retain the conventional stock look, regular steering wheel, made a new shifter handle, and of course modified the floor and so on and so forth. As I said, this has been a very extensive build. I'm going to say that my father first started this undertaking around 2014, and this is now November 1st, 2025, and it got this far. Having said that, though, he stopped working on it around 2023 as his condition started to progress. Dad was very good about documentation and stuff. So he has a binder that goes over the origin of the vehicle. It was a right-hand cylinder bank. We can see here that he's noting that. So it was a right hand, so it's two passenger side cylinder heads that were mated together. that is an image of how a conventional 356 engine looks. And already here we can see this is in the early stages of developing the cylinder head, and we can see a piece of bar stock that is utilizing all of the factory cam journals in order to ensure proper alignment. Block was decked and machined. We'll get to the camshaft in a moment. Here again we see some of the fixturing. I will at some point host all of these photos digitally, just don't have them at the time of recording. We can see how the cylinder heads were put together at this point here. And ultimately, we can see everything put together. I'm going to touch on the cam here. We queried, I think we reached out to Crower to see if they could put together a cam for us, and they came back with a absolutely astronomical value, or cost I should say. And that's understandable. This would be a one-off piece, and maybe they just didn't want to get involved, and that totally makes sense. So Dad went in a different direction, and he made his own camshaft. Essentially what he did was he made one complete camshaft out of the factory cams that the motor came with. Modern camshaft manufacturing is not what we think of when, from a hot rodder standpoint, just old architecture where you have a cam blank and it gets ground the lobes get ground and so on and so forth. But starting with a cast piece machined to meet the application. Modern stuff actually uses lobes that are then placed over a hollow tube that would sort of be the main cam blank, shall I say. And then they draw a mandrel through that hollow tube, which then creates an interference fit. As that mandrel is drawn through the camshaft, it creates that compression or interference fit, and that's how it's made. Ultimately, it ends up being lighter. There's probably a lot of other engineering reasons behind it, and one thing is that you're working with smaller components, so you can make a hardened roller camshaft surface, but not dealing with the overall component being of that composite or of that nature. The lobes themselves are, say, high-grade tool steel. I'm no machinist or metallurgist, but the tube itself then is hollow. Anyway, it's built in components. So he undid all of that, then made a fixture to properly index all of them and put those pieces together. So a visual of that, what he started off with, trying to avoid reflection, is he took these cam pieces and put them together all on one common shaft, which we then see here. That was done with a fixture. Here's another shot of all the cam components. And then he built a fixture so that he was able to hold all these in place and put it all back together. And that fixture actually we still have right here. Not that we're going to build another one of these, but anyway, it's one of those things what are you going to do with it? Who the heck knows, but you can't throw it away. Anyway. Also, again, had to engineer the overhead cam drive. We can see a little bit of it here. Had to make a timing case for it all. And it was done, this overhead drive was done utilizing factory components. So we see the chain here and everything else, and it's got hydraulic tensioners. Everything that you would expect in a modern design was retained as part of this build. Here's a shot of the completed timing case, and we also see the coolant manifold. So there's a manifold so that to manage the back cylinder head, so to speak, and join it with the front one, and then bring it up through the thermostat housing. We can see here, initial mock-up. We see the block, we see the deck plate, and then we see the sleeves in the bores. And going the wrong direction in all this. Hood sides being lengthened. Anyway, I think I'll just cut to the chase. Oh yeah, here we go. So here's a visual of the completed cylinder head all together, welded together. Quite an undertaking, must I say. It's really a shame that he was not able to see this through. For me, it's one of those things that it would be, you'd think, or I feel an obligation in a way to finish it, but honestly, like Clint Eastwood says, man's got to know his limitations. For myself, I love this stuff. I appreciate it. I geek out on all these details, but it's not my speed. So this will be sold on. I think I have somebody who's really going to be a proper caretaker for it. Unfortunately, it won't live on in this chassis here. If everything goes through, he's going to be putting it into a Packard Clipper. And now the other car. This is a 1970 Chevelle 4-door. As a little bit of background, because both of these vehicles are obviously really, really unique. My father was very keen on 4-doors. Historically, my father had a 64 or 65 Fury 4-door, 426 street wedge, 4-speed car. He didn't order that car. It was actually ordered by a Chrysler zone manager in New Jersey, and through my grandfather, who has a long dealership history. He got word of it, told my father about it, and he went and bought it. The car that followed that one, and I won't say it's been a matter of debate because they are now acknowledged in the hobby, but my father ordered a 1966 Belvedere 2, Plymouth Belvedere 2, 4-door Hemi 4-speed car. And he was the first and fifth owner of that car. And a gentleman by the name of George, who lived in Paterson, New Jersey. I'm being assumptive, but it's a logical assumption. I won't get into all the details, but it was stolen on the night of July 4th, 1980, and went to Paterson, New Jersey. We know it went to Paterson, New Jersey, because we got an overdue parking ticket from the city of Paterson in September of 1980. The ticket was dated 5 days after the car was stolen. Very unfortunate. I have a lot of photographs. I will do a future video on the history of that car, just to document it and share it. The car that preceded the Chevelle here, which was really, really a unique piece, because I had the joy of messing with a lot of people, was a 1983 Chevy Caprice 4-door. Two-tone brown with brown velour interior, and we equipped that with a Crate GM LS6 and a Doug Nash 5-speed. This was built in the late 80s. At that time, you can go to any GM dealership. GM was offering a Crate LS6. It was a combination of a 70 and 71 LS6, and what I mean by that is it utilized the cylinder heads and everything of a 70 Chevelle. I guess the heads would be the same, but the point is they utilized the 70 heads with the 71 pistons. So a 70 Chevelle would be, LS6 would be, I believe, 11-to-1 compression, and in 1971, which were only available in Corvettes in 71 and only in Chevelles in 70, 71s were 9.5-to-1 compression. By taking the 71 pistons with the 70 heads, you were able to get a motor that was around 10.25, and that worked. Everything else was LS, it was a complete engine, water pump to flywheel, intake manifold to oil pan. Beautiful piece. Take it out of the crate, swap it in. And that's what we did. And we dressed it out completely like a 1970 motor. What I mean by that is it still had exhaust manifolds, the smog tubes, the correct 1970 Holley. At the time, you could still buy one from Holley. Maybe still today you can. I don't know. Stock high-rise intake. We put on the A6 long AC compressor. That the AC in that car, you could freeze meat in it. And it was very unassuming, other than a set of 15x7 rally wheels and a little bit of dual exhaust just peeking out underneath the bumper. No tips, just turn downs. And a little badge on the trunk lid that said 5-speed. It was actually a GM badge that would have come on like some Pontiac or whatever, one of those late 80s front-wheel drive Pontiacs. We put that on the trunk lid, and then up front on the front fender, where it would say Caprice Classic, he then got a 454 emblem that would be utilized on a 70 Chevelle. And with that, total sleeper, in the same vein as his Hemi car. 5-speed sticking up through the floor, a Monte Carlo. It's probably used in other cars, but we had cut up a Monte Carlo to get some of the components, and we used the floor tunnel, the ring, the boot, everything else. Totally looked OE. Really, really cool piece. And that served him very well. It was my father's daily driver. At times it was my mother's daily driver. Again, I took it out on some road trips, went to the Mopar Nationals with it, went down to Washington, D.C. Doesn't matter. It was a lot of fun. Really caught a lot of people off guard. And I wish it was a digital age at that time, because it would have been great to capture that car in video. But ultimately then, Dad wanted to go over the top. And so in the 90s, he started building this. This is pretty extreme. And it's not everybody's speed, and I get that, but let's just start with the motor. And as we see on the badging here, 675. Yeah, it's 675 cubic inches. Now this is back in the 90s. You know, big strokers were, I'll say, maybe coming along and stuff, but this was a pretty extreme. And still today, that's a heck of a cubic inch displacement. So how was that achieved? The foundation for the motor in this car is a Bill Mitchell World Products, what they call the super block. So if you're familiar with big block Chevys, you had, let's talk 427s, whatever, it doesn't matter. You had a conventional big block Chevy, and then you had the truck version or marine version, which had a slightly taller deck height. And that was easily discerned by looking at where the water pump bolts to the block. And for a conventional 454, the deck surface would be flush right about where the water pump is affixed to the block. Whereas in the truck version, you have a little bit of a gap. On this, gaps like that. I think it's 10.2 inch stroke, 10.2 inch deck height. So that was the foundation. And from there, everything else got built. Pardon me while I figure out how to open the hood on this car. Oh, that's right. He moved it inside. I should have remembered that. I went through it like 2 weeks ago. We'll get to the interior in a minute. So I guess I'll start front to back. So the radiator starts here, goes all the way across here. So this car was built frame off. So one of the things that are on the front of the frame horns cut is there's a piece of channel that goes all the way and spans it across, which gives the radiator a perfect saddle to sit in to ensure maximum cooling. It's very hard to see what I was talking about with regards to the water pump housing per se. And that's because one thing else that we see here is we see this, I'll say this manifold. Here's the water pump, which normally would bolt to the block. And then we have this aluminum manifold in here. And out of that manifold, there are hard to see, there are cooling lines that go to the back. At the time that this build started, I had purchased a 1994 Camaro Z28. So you had the, I guess it's Gen 2, whatever, the LT1, not the 1970 LT1, but the LT1 that had started, I guess it offered in 1992 in Corvettes and went through until the LS series engine was introduced. Those engines had reverse cooling. And so the coolant was directed through the heads, down through the block, and then circulated into the radiator. Dad decided to go in that direction. We weren't sure if that would really work out or not as a concept. So as part of engineering this manifold here to redirect the coolant, it was designed so that the width of this manifold matched a long water pump versus a short water pump. With big block Chevys, there are two different, and yeah, I guess I'll stay with big blocks. Big block Chevy, there's two different water pump offering, a long and a short. Short ones were used in Corvettes, longs were used in everything else. So this utilizes a short water pump, which enabled us to have that space to put that manifold in there, but had it been a failure in use, we could easily revert to a conventional water pump and go right back to the way the GM engineers designed it. So we have a Bill Mitchell World Products Super Block. This has a Crower crank, 3-inch mains. I don't know the bore and stroke stuff. These are Dart heads. We have this fabricated intake manifold, and the other thing that was fabricated is the throttle body. That throttle body in its entirety, my father engineered, and it's got bearings on the shaft, everything else. Actuates beautifully. This is actually the second throttle body setup that was utilized on this motor. Originally, what we had done was we had gotten a pair of big bore throttle bodies that were designed for or intended for use on a 5-liter Ford. Again, this is the 90s, and still 5 liters are incredibly popular, but at the time that was what you played with Fords. So we grabbed a pair of those, and he made his own throttle shaft so that he could join those, pair them up and had them mounted to the front. Ultimately, he decided that those were not sufficient in airflow, so he fabricated this entirely out of aluminum. It's direct port injected, and it's also running coil packs. Back at this time, it was long before the offerings that we see from MSD, Holley, and everybody else. This system is from a company called Tech 2. It was cutting edge at the time, but that's sort of like saying a Commodore 64 was cutting edge in the early 80s. It's definitely a dated concept at this point. Going back to the intake manifold. So this intake manifold here is a Wyand tunnel ram. And what was done, because again, this is a tall deck block, so everything up goes and spans outward. So we took the tunnel ram, split it right up the middle, mounted it to each cylinder head, and then welded and built it all around it and built this removable top plate for it. Fabricated his own headers. These are fabricated out of precast stainless steel castings. They probably weigh a ton. They've been jet hot coated. They'll last forever. You could probably throw them down with the Titanic and it'll be the last thing that remains after that unfortunate ship dissolves. A lot of other nuances, and there's so many to go through, and we won't cover them all because I won't remember them. We stuck with the conventional air conditioning. I don't know why he was adamant about doing that rather than go with a vintage air setup. I mean, by this time, at the time of build, vintage air was an available product and everything could have been underneath the dash. Instead, what he did was he took the factory box and sectioned it moved this over, remounted it to the firewall, and then molded into the other piece that would mount to the firewall itself. So basically sectioned it, widened it, and put it back together. What else? The hood. Yes, the hood. So this hood scoop is actually, the top part of this hood scoop here is the top of another stock Chevelle hood. So as we see, there's, I'm not going to rub that in, but the peak that we see here and the peak that we see here, this came from another hood, and then this was all built out. And then we have the fresh air snouts for the intake. Another detail with the vehicle. My father decided to use these stock GM mirrors. I believe these were Camaro. However, if you had just merely bolted them on the vehicle in that location, they wouldn't be usable at all. So these actually have custom base that he machined so that the pedestal can be raised and moved outward so that the mirror could actually be used. This 675 emblem, again, he machined all of that. Going to try to show the undercarriage of this vehicle, but I'm lacking lighting here, so I probably will just be talking while you can see nothing. But anyway, yeah. It's got a 3-inch exhaust all the way back, continuously welded, stainless steel. And you can actually remove the exhaust system from the header collectors and drop the tailpipes and take it out in one huge piece. It's again overkill. It's all stainless steel. It's all welded. Probably weighs a ton. Another feature that the vehicle has is Corvette ZR1 rims. So we have a 335. Yeah. 335 3517 underneath this. ZR1s had, if you're familiar with, I'm talking C4 ZR1s, they had a wider, well, they needed a wider tire. So GM built these, had these wheels, and those cars had an entirely different rear piece and also a different door, so that it can encapsulate the width of the additional width of running these rims. Underneath the car also is, on the topic of ZR1s, is a ZR1 6-speed. So at this time, this was long before we had the T56 offering. So from a GM perspective, the only thing that was available was the ZF 6-speed. However, there is a difference between a ZR1 ZF 6-speed and an L98 6-speed. What that difference is the input shaft length. We used a ZR1 version so that there was enough input shaft length to allow for the fabrication or the fabricated adapter that mates this transmission to a conventional scatter shield, GM Lakewood scatter shield. Tons of gauges, even an air fuel meter. Again, who ran those back in the 90s? Tilt wheel, cruise control, air conditioning. Back in the day, you had a CD changer. And so took this space, it was just enough bit of real estate to put in this Nakamichi head unit and the corresponding six disc changer. Power windows were added, power windows, and also power vent windows. This should look familiar to C4 Corvette enthusiasts because, yes, this is from a C4 console. Console facing here. I don't know what these rocker switches are. The seats in the vehicle are, I think, like 96 Buick Riviera, dare I say. So yeah, plush, comfy. Yeah, they're just pretty darn big. Also, power door locks. This vehicle was built from a 31,000 mile old lady owner car. A neighbor of a coworker that my father had this car. And so through the coworker, because she was friendly with the neighbor, reached out to her and just asked, hey, you ever want to sell the car? Ultimately, she passed away, and when the executor saw that note, reached out, and my father was able to purchase the car. So this whole project from an engine and transmission standpoint was already well underway before he acquired the car. In the interim, before having acquired that rust-free car, he actually bought a 71 Chevelle from a friend of mine. And so ultimately this car is a combination of those two cars. The frame that's underneath this came from that 71, and then everything else here is from that 70. Getting a little parched here. I should have brought water with me. My friend Jeremy did all the paint and body work on this thing. Wasn't too much to do. Oh, getting into more modifications. Oh, and another thing. So, a couple more things. Let's go back underneath. That is a Corvette rear suspension. Yeah. So this has a Dana 44 308 gears from 88 Corvette. C4s, suspension wise, forgetting about Z51 versus standard, but 84 through 87 was one suspension, or had one, from I'll say a flange to flange aspect on the suspension was, say, this wide. When in 98 and through, I'm sorry, 88 through 92, those had a wider, wow, not 92, pardon me, 88 through 96, they ran that revised suspension. And with those changes, you ended up from an axle flange to axle flange got wider. So we used an 88 because somehow that was just the best combination for the vehicle. Another thing with the frame modifications, everything, and with the Corvette suspension, the C4s have a spine that would run from the differential up to the transmission. Since we were using a Corvette transmission and a Corvette rear axle, we ultimately ended up installing that spine mechanism, so to speak. We had to take two of them, section it, weld it together to form that spine to fit this vehicle. With all those changes, it's hard to see, but the trunk floor was raised. And another thing that's here is this. What the heck is that? That is a vacuum power brake setup. I don't know why Dad didn't go with Hydro Boost. I don't know if he wasn't familiar with it or whatever, but instead of putting Hydro Boost on this, went with this remote vacuum setup. It sounds great. It didn't quite really work out well, but anyway, that's what went into the car. Another thing with all of that, with the change, is you see this neck here. Ultimately, the fuel filler had to be relocated. So instead of being behind the rear bumper, it's now here on the side. What else can I say about this? This was another thing that was many, many years in the build. I'm trying to go down memory lane, remember things in my head. He started this in, I'm going to say 95, 96, and the car I think was completed by 99. He's put about 17,000 miles on it over the years. One thing, again, going back to the fuel injection and ignition aspect, back then these were not self-learning systems. And they were from software standpoint, as well as just from a design standpoint. by today's standards, they're very archaic. You really needed to be, you really need to know tuning in order to do it yourself. Whereas today, you have a much better technology, you have self-learning, you have, certainly with Holly, not that I've ever used their products, but you know that they have a call center, and there's so many other tuners out there playing in this space now. The whole industry has evolved. None of that was really in place when this was put together. So with that, it was hard to get this thing totally ever perfectly dialed in. And so with that, I'll say that frustration or whatever, the realization of this vehicle getting used as much as he envisioned never really took off. This was last on the road I'm going to say it was last registered in 2017. I think it really saw road duty probably no later than 2014. And clearly evident it's been languishing ever since. This too will be sold on. Again, it's a humongous part of my father's legacy. I could ramble on for an hour about a lot of the other unique things that he's fabricated and built or been part of over his life, and it's dementia's. I mean, it's obvious, but dementia is really, really hard, and he's living it, unfortunately, and his brothers did too. But anyway, the point is, I will never make anything out of this myself. It's just, again, I appreciate it. It's his legacy, but it's best that somebody else takes it on. Whatever they do with it, they do with it. If I were to keep it, if I had a 10,000 foot garage, 10,000 square foot garage, and just, let me tuck it in the corner for one day, I know I'm never going to do anything with it, and I end up being like that guy that never gives something up. Not that like this is a Hemi Cuda sitting on a front lawn and not being sold, but yeah, so it's time to let this go. I don't know what else. I guess that's about it. Been really rambling along here. Certainly appreciate you joining in on this. You got any questions, drop me a comment. One other thing here. Yes, how could I forget? All of this here. 2 manuals. Binder, folder. All of that is documentation, receipts, everything as part of the Chevelle here. Everything thoroughly written out. I will, since this is printed, obviously, the point is my father did this on Microsoft Word. I know there's a digital copy. I've just got to find it on his computers. I haven't had a chance to get to it, but I will host it just for some, I'll say, bedtime reading. It's pretty exhaustive. I mean, goes through the origins, talks about his Caprice, everything else, how the car looked when it was first onto the road. But all of the build, everything thoroughly written out. Here's another little just fun comical thing. So this is the ZR1 6-speed. This was actually the very first part that was purchased for this build. It came up in Hemmings Motor News, and Dad just jumped on it and went and bought it. The comical thing, a few of my friends know about this. This is the box that Dad had it stored in. Dad didn't want Mom to know what he was up to. How often does that happen in a hot rodding household? So the transmission was kept in the basement, and it was called the Pygmy's Coffin. Probably that was not in good taste, considering, I don't know, we're in such a racially charged world this way. Can people take a joke for once? But anyway, this was called the Pygmy's Coffin. So anytime we were talking about the transmission, we referenced it as the Pygmy's Coffin. Photos of all the frame modifications to mount the Corvette rear, and just on and on and on. The headers that he fabricated. Exhaustive documentation. Anyway, so one of y'all is interested in this thing, hit me up. I am objective. I realize that this is not everybody's speed, and that most likely the next person is going to buy it yank the motor out of it, and probably kick it to the curb. That's going to hurt, but again, you can't save everything, and I'm not going to be a prisoner of all this, because Lord knows I've got a lot of other stuff to work through. And just full disclosure, this is a cleaned out version of this shop. I don't even want to, I won't get into it. Anyway, thanks for watching. Really appreciate it if you made it here to the end. Any questions, hit me up on the comments. Like, subscribe, share, do all those things. I will be bringing along a lot more content in the future. Got a lot of other stuff in the pipeline. Got 3 other videos which I haven't even edited yet or put together. I've done this in a single take so I can just upload it and let it fly, because I really wanted to get this done before it got too darn cold to be out here in the garage in New Hampshire where these are located. And yeah, I've got a whole house still to work through and everything else. So anyway, with that, I'll shut my mouth. Thanks for watching. Take care, and we'll see you soon. Thanks again from Authentic Motorworks.